First, I'm going to invite Shamus. I mean, Shamus is someone who's not only a community activist, he's got a role, he's been politically active within Kashmir even before he came over to the UK in the 90s. But since then, I've known Shamus for a very long time in various activities around Kashmir identity, around other Kashmiri struggle. And really, the first time when I was asked by Mukhtar that Shamus would written a book on Kashmir identity, and I thought actually it would be Kashmir identity from the point of view of the UK, and I was pleasantly surprised when I started reading it. The fact that it does cover a whole area, really, in terms of history of Kashmir, history of Kashmiri struggle from the 1930s all the way up to the present period. The question of identity, question of how people perceive, how people see themselves, how people define themselves, and how that changes with time as well, really. But again, I don't want to take up Shamus's contribution, really. But what I'm going to do is ask Shamus maybe to speak for about 10 minutes, give us a bit of a flavor, really, of the book, and then, we can have a discussion. I mean, what I want to do, really, is bring as many of you as possible into the discussion with Shamus, have that interactive discussion with Shamus, really, so we can get to the bottom or the deep end of what Shamus has been trying to sort of get across in his book, really. But over to you.
Thank you very much, Javed, and thank you everybody for being here. And well, I can give you some highlights of this book in 10 minutes, and then we can discuss if there are questions. This is mainly about Azad Kashmir, what is commonly called Azad Kashmir, and obviously it has a lot of other descriptions depending on your political position and political stance, like Indian, Pakistani occupied Kashmir, Pakistani occupied southern Kashmir, Pakistani administered Kashmir, Pakistani controlled Kashmir. So all this terminology is used in different spheres and by different presenters. In this book, I have the longest chapter is on the history of Azad Kashmir, how this idea came about, from which struggle it was born, and how then this government was set up, and how there are different interpretations of the setting up of the government, and then the extent to which it has autonomy or control over its own affairs, and how much it is controlled and steered by the Pakistani administration through different structures like Kashmir Council and all that. And it actually, here I did go further back in history to highlight some of the, which I think are misreading or misconceptions of that period of history. And for example, it is common kind of perception that the modern popular struggle was started with the Reading Room Party or Young Men Muslims of Jammu and Reading Room Party of Srinagar. But there is very little knowledge about the activities which were taking place before that around the civil activism. I mean, for example, first meeting for civil rights in Kashmir was taking place in 1950, and it was organized by Sardar Budh Singh, and he was originally from Mirpur, and he later became active in the National Conference and was its president twice. And when New Kashmir was presented, he was the head of party at that time. So similarly, it is also this misconception or contested incident of history, the formation of the state. It is commonly projected as a kind of sale deed where Kashmir Valley was sold to, majority Muslim people were sold to a Hindu ruler by British under the Treaty of Amritsar, which of course is one of the readings. But if you go into it, it was basically a follow-up of another treaty which was signed between British East India Company and Punjabi rulers who lost a war against British, and as a result of that they were to pay the war indemnity money to British. That was 15 lakh rupees. It's 1.5 million. And but then they could not pay, and it was in the first treaty that if they can't pay, then these areas British will take over, and then it's up to them what they do with that. So because they could not pay, so British then had control over those areas, and Gulab Singh of Jammu, he then obviously he was in interaction and communication with British, and he said, I am willing to pay if I can have the control of these areas, because he already controlled Jammu and Ladakh, I think, yes. So he then paid that money, and which was reduced to half, 7.5 lakh. So and then the another related misconception is that Hindu bought Muslim population. In fact, he did not pay all money from his pocket. He collected it from local landlords and local people with money, and they included many Muslims. So it was not simple Hindu-Muslim thing the way it is presented. And similarly, if we move forward, then there is a misconception. The National Conference was, Muslim Conference was changed to National Conference through a conspiracy by few Hindus like Premnath Bazar and Indian Prime Minister Nehru and all that. But it involved massive discussions for a few years. The debate started in 1933, soon after the formation of Muslim Conference in 1932, and it went on to 1939, and it was changed through first the Central Committee meeting, then the Working Party meeting, then the National General Council meeting. So it was not simple one person's decision. So similarly, there are a lot of other issues which I have raised, which I can't go through in detail about everyone, each one of those. And similarly, then the way government was formed, and the idea was obviously coined for the first time of Azad Kashmir in 1946 in the convention of Mazdoor Kisan Party, who not many people know, who are interested in Kashmir, but not many people know that there was another party of peasants and workers, which was disintegrated with the disintegration of the state. And and then the Azad Kashmir government itself, it was declared on 4th of October, and then it was reorganized on 24th of October. Well, interestingly, I always thought that 4th of October was very independent Kashmiri government. But when you closely read, then you realize, hang on a second, on July 19th, 1947, there is this Muslim Conference Party meeting of minority members who called this meeting to oppose the resolution which was passed one day before by the majority of Muslim Conference, the new Muslim Conference, and this meeting was to oppose that resolution by minority. The minority which opposed it, they called the meeting on 19th, and then they passed the accession to Pakistan resolution. And that meeting is called by Sardar Ibrahim Khan from Poonch, Barrister Sardar Ibrahim Khan, who was a rising star in Muslim Conference at that time. And then on 4th of October, when this independent government is formed, he is Prime Minister of that government. And in 2 months, he changed from pro-Pakistan position to pro-independence position. It's a question. I'm not saying that he did not, but it's a question. And then obviously there are a lot of other similar things which can be controversial or which can be can have different views, but they are not like the established discourse or narrative on Kashmir. And then I try to write about British Kashmiris, how migration started and how people came here. I mean, not many people know. Usually people say, oh, they came here because of Mangla Dam. And the first Kashmiri in Britain was a woman who came in 1833. Her name was Jani, and she was from Srinagar. And there are two versions of how she met this British colonial army officer. One is that she was daughter of a royal, and through their interaction, the Colonel Robert Thorpe fell in love with her, and then married and converted to Islam, married and brought her to Britain. The other is that she was a common peasant girl who was taking her herds to valleys, and there the colonel saw him, and then he asked her a hand from his uncle who was also in the army, blah blah. So there are these misconceptions, and also obviously then when we talk about, and she was not the only one, by the way. There were other marriages like that at that time. So then we know that how the migration of labor started from the Diyal area mainly, and then from wider Mirpur area. And that also was started at the turn of 20th century, not in 1965 or 1960, but 1900. I know his name is Mumtaz Bhatt from Birmingham, who told me his grandfather, I think Khwaja Abdul Karim, he came to Britain in 1900 as a worker. So, and obviously there's a, but then I discussed the issue of identity, how it was born and grown up in Britain as ethnic identity of a community which Triabi Sahab also hinted about, that how identity changed, his identity changed from Jat, Mirpuri to Kashmiri. So this process obviously happened in certain people, and it did not happen in some other quarter. And independence politics again, which I discussed, how it was born in Mirpur after the division, reborn, and how then it grown there and came to Britain, and what role that politics played in the sort of strengthening of Kashmiri identity in Britain, and how it is kind of contested and suppressed also by different rival claimants of Kashmiri population's identity. And then I have discussed the birth and growth of, or origin and then evolution of Kashmiri identity inside Kashmir, because it was originally valley identity. Kashmir is what usually now is called Kashmir proper, is a valley of I think 80 miles long and 40 miles wide, and identity was initially associated with that region. But again, it was associated from outside. The travelers and other than later on the colonials, they described Kashmir, but they never meant only the valley of Kashmir. But it actually was a geographical identity which evolved as to do with the Kashmir Valley. But it was never a cultural identity. It was never a linguistic identity. It was always a regional identity. The cultural and linguistic identity of that region is kosher or Kashmiri. But then they both became synonymous as one, equating one to the other. But with the political movement, the popular politics, this identity then came out of the valley and became a political identity of wider regions than Kashmir Valley. But again, it did not cover the whole state, because it was a constructed identity, and the construction force was political movement. So when political movement was divided in 1947, so this identity formation process was also disintegrated. and then it survived in Valley and in Azad Kashmir, and in diaspora through, because diaspora is from Azad Kashmir as well. So, that's how we became Kashmiris. Because usually there is a debate, and still there is a debate, and quite strong debate which usually we avoid. That there are Kashmiri people who say, well, how am I Kashmiri? How can I speak Kashmiri? And then they say, well, I am told I am Jat, Raja, Khwaja, I'm from Mirpur, and I'm Pakistani, and I'm Muslim. So where is this Kashmiri coming from? So there is this contestation is still there, and there are different forces projecting different sort of identity labels. And then at the end, the last bit is I briefly gave the points where there is a consensus between Kashmiris, because usually they are told that, oh, you don't have one voice. Yes, there are so many voices, but there are some common voices. They are saying the same thing. And then there are some differences. And then there are some objection on Kashmiris that, particularly on pro-independence politics, that how you can have Kashmir a united country, because there are so many languages, so many cultures, so many regions. And but obviously this objection comes from Indians and from Pakistanis who have more diversity than Kashmir. But because the political forces within Kashmir are not inexistent in all parts of the state, so therefore this is a major question for pro-independence politics, major challenge. And to this I call kind of that there is a way of a democratic way of giving autonomy to all regions, but at the same time, if this argument from India and Pakistan that on that basis they cannot have an independent state, then this devolution, will it also be applied to India and Pakistan? Will the Indian different states will given right to self-determination, like they are asking for all the Kashmiri regions to be given, which is principally right, or will they give it to their own people and send to Pakistan? So that is kind of gist of the book. Thank you.
We obviously going to hear a lot more from Shama Secretary, but just I want to ask maybe a couple of questions. Yeah, of course. Sorry. I think it might be, it definitely would be interesting to hear really from yourself in terms of how you became authentic, how you became active.
Yeah, that's why I wanted you to ask.
I'm talking not just from the point of view of how you became active in Britain, but also in terms of within the Kashmir itself, or Pakistani or that is sort of that, whatever you want to call it. I mean, I call it Pakistani or Kashmir, but I don't think there's any other name that would describe it better than that. Really,
well, I was, to be honest, I was not active at all in any kind of politics till 11th February 1984. I was born in a family which is very much Jamaat Islami Muslim Conference family, and the village and that town of Akalgarh and village Moralwara, I can recall only one person when I was growing there who was openly known as pro-independence, and he was Professor Nazir Anjum, who later became one of the well-known poet of Kashmiri aspirations in Azad Kashmir, certainly. And he was kind of seen as, bonga, he's crazy or wild, eccentric, that he is talking this, oh, it's not possible. The thing is, what I remember from people, then it's not possible. So why you are, going afterwards is not possible. So that is the memory I have of this. And then when I went to Mirpur College, I saw National Student Federation, openly kind of raising slogans, independent Kashmir. And at that point, my understanding, my perception was that they are kafir and they are against Pakistan. So they are doing these kind of things. And that was the level of my political activism or interest. Otherwise, we are different interests at that age. And when I went to Karachi University, I was still part of Islami Jamiyat Tulba. And by not that I was active, I was just because my father was belonged to that party. And but it was in Karachi that I kind of came across different pro-independence activists from Mirpur. Raja Iftikhar is one of the guys who actually pestered me a lot to read what I never did. And but then it was on 11th February that in the evening of 10th February that there were some hustle bustle in the outside of the hostel in the lawn, and there are a lot of people, students gathering there. So I looked from my floor and I came out of my room and looked down, and I could see that they almost all were Kashmiris. So I came down and I found out that tomorrow Makbul Bhatt will be hanged in Delhi, India. And about Makbul Bhatt, all I knew was that he is an activist, and from my understanding, he was working for India. He was Indian agent, and so I was not much bothered about it. But then, when everybody was going, and my roommate Mansha and other roommate called Kareem, they asked me, let's go, and I said, well, I'm not going. But he said, oh, well, Jumati are going as well. Why are you not coming? So I said, okay, I'll come. So we went there. We had a public meeting outside of Indian Embassy, and a lot of people made speeches, including Shaukat Kashmiri, who is PNP, UK PNP head now, and some other Tariq Ayub, etc. And I was kind of, then I found out that there was a kidnapping in Birmingham a week ago of Indian diplomat, and who was murdered then, and then in revenge, India has done this. So again, I thought, okay. Although I was not much kind of, you can say, moved or, okay. But the next day, obviously, when I went to university, there was a university bus there. Not one bus, there were quite a few buses in the ground, and there are a lot of people were getting onto those buses. And some of my friends also were there, and they said, we're going to Indian Embassy and doing protest, and so we come. I said, no, I need to go to train station because I want to go home tomorrow. And they said, yeah, train station nearby, so you can come with us, and then afterwards we'll go and buy tickets. So that is how I got onto their bus, and we went there, did stoning and all that. I didn't do it. There are a few other people who didn't do it, who stood in the bus. Then we went to the Indian Embassy, did the same thing, came back to the Indian Airline office, and now there were a lot of police people. Before there was no police, but now it was kind of a large contingent of police was there. And again, I did not come out, but then the tear gas shell came in the bus. So I jumped out of the window and walked a few yards away and stood on a footpath with other spectators, with the tears coming out of my eyes. And then somebody came from behind and picked me up and lifted up in the air. And I couldn't even see who he was. But then he started walking, lifting, holding me in his hand. And then he threw me to the police vehicle. And they really did good beating. And then I kind of went with a big blow. I kind of went unconscious. Consciously, I went unconscious on the floor, and I thought they will stop now. I thought they will stop, but they didn't. And then they were, swearing at me and saying, oh, you Kashmiris are like this, you know, and say, shout, Kashmir banega Pakistan. And I did that because that was I you know, kind of believing in at that time. But they still kept meeting. Then we went to custodian block after 4 or 5 hours. But after that day, I mean, for a few days I could not even drink tea. Normally I had to drink with chammach, and my lung was damaged as well. But I could not stop thinking, why? You know, why they did that, and what is this? And then, obviously, gradually I started reading, and I started talking to people who I didn't know before, and asking questions. And from then on, I think I continuously, every day, I did some reading, try to understand.
You know what they say, once a Jamatiya, always a Jamatiya. When did you finally made a break?
No personal questions, please.
Obviously,
No personal questions.
no, obviously, in politics, every party has saying about other parties, and that does not mean the saying that they apply to everybody.
Now, more on a serious note, Shabbos, my understanding as an obviously reader and observer of Kashmiri, particularly nationalist politics, I think that actually the nationalist leadership probably has, particularly on the side, has done very little damage and harm to the movement and the struggle over the years. Right? And you know, all I can think of and all I could see over the years is that they've been looking towards the United Nations and the two resolutions that got passed in 1948 and that is, you know, that's how I see that their liberation of Kashmir is going to come from. I mean, what's been your experience or what's your
I think yes, initially, obviously, plebiscite front was main demand of plebiscite front was a referendum, that there should be a referendum which India and Pakistan promised to Kashmiris at United Nations. And but then NLF obviously broke away from that. They said you can't have that by demands. You have to do like other nations are doing, because the national liberation was very popular at that time. So they took up arms and did guerrilla activities. And then if you look at NSF did not. I think there are two traditions. One is PF plebiscite front tradition, and one is NSF tradition. And NSF tradition focused more on Pakistani occupation and through civil and political agitations. But obviously NLF and then JKLF went on to armed struggle, and their focus was Indian occupation all the time. So and there is a stronger kind of a demand for United Nations intervention or United Nations resolution. But from the NSF tradition, I think it was all like, a political movement, and through that, obviously, there can be a lot of issues with both strands, and criticism is there. But I think it's not as simple that they always looked for UN intervention. They did their own bit as well.
Maybe we can take up this in the final session, because the idea is that then the audience can ask questions really to everybody in the final session as well. But you can ask questions briefly. I think we can ask questions directly to Shabbos before I move on to Fahad.
I just want you, Shamus, to highlight around these 1930s disobedience movement and the role of these two individuals from Mirpur.
Yeah, like I said, Sardar Budh Singh was one of the activists who organized the first public meeting for civil rights in 1950. And he was Wazir-e-Wazarat at that time as well. So obviously there's a lot more to say about him and his work.
This is one before the 1947 partition, so why you said 1950?
15,
sorry.
And then there were other activists who became more active with the time, and they included Raja Akbar and Maulvi Abdullah Siakwi, Maulvi Wabdeen, Baba, I forgot his first name, but his second name was, I think, Dolri. And there are other people whose name I don't remember by heart, but I mentioned there. And they were basically, Raja Akbar was ex-British Army person, and some were peasants, some were clergymen or Maulvis, or but with a quite progressive position on politics and social issues. So, yeah, there were reasons.
I've been reading your book, and one of the things that I picked up was that you, to some extent, were arguing that Maharaja and there's a large chunk of Kashmir poverty was moving towards independence stance. And I would like to put it to you that the scenario for the princely states generally within British India at that time was really either a secondary war or there wasn't really a great deal of movement for an independent Kashmir. Even the National Conference were nationalists. They were looking towards forward accession to India at that time. What would you have to say about that?
No, I think that's misconception. The term accession was used for the first time in that Muslim Conference resolution on 19th July 1947. Before that, there is no mention of accession to India or Pakistan by any party. At least I have not come across. If there is evidence here, I'm willing to discuss that. But I have not come across it. So there were four, obviously it's a big question, but I'll just briefly tell. There were four perspectives of independent Kashmir before 47. One was Maharaja's official perspective. One was National Conference, which I call popular national perspective. Then one was Muslim Conferences, new Muslim Conference, which was religious national perspective. And they passed the independence resolution on 18th of July. So Maharaja's main achievement was state subject, and National Conference main was new Kashmir notion, and progressive. Other was progressive national of Muslim Conference, which whose main achievement or main identity symbol was Azad Kashmir. So they all were for independent Kashmir. Obviously, they have their own understanding and interpretation of what kind of Kashmir it will be, but they all was for. And to me.